All right. He's back for his fourth appearance. It has been about a year since we've had Coach McEvoy on. And for those of you that have been rocking with Last Second Sports for quite some time, you would know that Coach McEvoy helped introduce Trey Lance to the 49er universe before he was drafted. Big thanks to him for that. So, we are going to talk Trey Lance. We're going to talk a little bit about his quarterback camp and Malik Willis, who they had drafted this year as well. We're going to talk about all of that and more next. All right. Welcome back to Last Second Sports, where we are giving you our take down to the last second. And as I said, Coach McEvoy is back for his fourth appearance. Coach, it's been a while. How have you been?
I've been great. First of all, to come back, even the return time, the second time felt like an honor. And now time number 4, man, you guys are too nice to have me back one more time, man. But everything's been great. I'm excited for 49ers football this fall and I'm really excited to see Trey, take over the reins here. So
Absolutely. And I know we've been talking about it, we've been waiting on it. And that was the big thing is I didn't want to have you on before it was his team and we had to wait a whole year unfortunately, but here we are. It's his team. We're ready to go. But before we get into all that, I have a couple questions for you. And the first
sure.
one, just what are you up to? What's your current camps? What are your upcoming camps? What do you got going on?
Yeah, so we're kind of in that transition period from all of the off-season work that we've done with, our youth and high school quarterbacks, our college quarterbacks. We did our big flight school event where we bring in a bunch of the top college quarterbacks in the country and work with them. And, that's seen guys like Justin Fields and Malik Willis and Jalen Hurts and Trey Lance and those guys when they were still in college and, all the way through draft prep into the pros. And so that's always kind of a cool time where we know that those are the next few draft classes we're going to have come from that group. So we did that here in Atlanta in June. That was kind of our one big event of the year. And now we're transitioning into our in-season training. So, we'll between Quincy Avery and myself, we'll be bouncing around and following some of our NFL guys and making sure we're there for whatever they need. Doing the same thing to support our college guys on bye weeks and stuff. But a lot of focus is in season with our high school quarterbacks here in Atlanta. Usually we go on Sundays and just make sure they're mechanically ready to go each week. So, like I said, it's all this, each season is a completely different focus for us. I think the most fun part about this time for us is we just get to go watch our guys play, right? So all that work we put in the off season, now we get to kind of see it come to fruition. So
What are some of the college guys that you have up and coming that we should keep an eye out for?
yeah, Malik Cunningham at Louisville will be a guy that we expect to take into draft prep next year. Sean Clifford at Penn State, we've been working with for years. Um, Gary Bohannon, who was at Baylor, right? Had a really big year early on at Baylor and now just is at USF in South Florida. Another good, mature guy, really unique skill set that we expect big things out of there. Then there's a whole kind of next crop, a guy like Aaron McLaughlin, who I think we've talked about before, who is now down at Jacksonville State and, going to get his first opportunity to get on the field and play college football. Emory Jones, obviously, was at Florida and now in a new home at Arizona State. And so there's so much excitement when you see guys that, are either in new places or, bouncing back from maybe not as productive of a year, or guys that, similar to what Trey's going to do here, take the reins for the first time. So, yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be fun for sure.
Well, last time you were on the show, one of the guys that we talked about heavily as an up and comer that you said keep an eye on was Malik Willis. And he certainly caught fire early on in the year. And then the draft came and none of these quarterbacks were taken. It was crazy. But correct me if I'm wrong. Did you not fly out during the combine and help him prep? Were you in that hotel video where he's throwing in the hotel?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously Malik's a guy that I've trained since high school, right? So we're going to be there for every piece of his journey here, go throughout his whole career. But no, we were fortunate to train him all through high school and college, and Quincy Avery and the whole quarterback takeover gang. And then we ran his draft prep all the way through. So yeah, we're out there at the combine, out down there in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, out there in Vegas for the draft, and kind of took him all the way through. But no, super talented, really good, smart kid. The personality, the intangibles remind me a lot of a guy like Trey. Just like
Right.
you get in the room with him and you can't help but fall in love with him, with the way he works and how much he loves the game of football. So yeah, really excited to see what comes next for him now with the Titans.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I remember when we talked right after the draft, and you were there in the draft, and you guys were anticipating where Trey was going to go. It was
Yeah.
almost a lock he was going to be a top 10 guy, and hoping it was San Francisco, but weren't quite sure. And then I don't know if you were actually there for the draft with Malik like you were with Trey, but I different story, right?
Sure.
Many rounds are passing, many players are passing. I'm sitting here saying, please don't go to the Seahawks. Like every time they passed on him, I was cheering because I've
Yeah.
heard so many great things from you about him. And he ends up with the Tennessee Titans, which I think is a great spot for him. It gives him a year to figure it out. Tough football team, well coached. And I love that spot for him. And we've seen a little bit of him in the preseason, but overall, like, just how happy are you with Malik ending up as a Titan? And then just some early thoughts on his preseason game, if you're able to catch that.
Of course, yeah, and you summed it up really well. Like the draft did not go the way we thought it was going to, the way we expected, and I think sometimes that is the way it pans out. But at the end of the day, you're happy if you feel like they found the right fit and the right spot. I think if you look at some of the QB needy teams and what they were looking for and what their team looked like moving forward, I think there was really no better fit than Tennessee. They have a veteran quarterback who's had success. There's so much of similarities with maybe the Jimmy G and Trey coming in behind. And, they have a guy they've won with. He's gotten them into the playoffs. Tennessee was a first seed last year, but, wasn't able to maybe get them as far as they wanted to go. And maybe Tennessee felt there was a need to improve at that position. And yeah, so we love the fit. You said it. Great heart, physical team. They like to run the ball. All their passing stuff is going to come off the run game. You got a guy like Derrick Henry in the backfield. You got a hard-nosed coach like Mike Vrabel. Some really good weapons around them, and things that I think really work into Malik's skill set with being able to add to the run game himself, being able to play action and bootleg off a very strong run game, and add just another layer that, like I said, they just haven't had at the quarterback position. So who knows? It's very similar to Trey. Will it be in the next 6 months? Will it be in the next 2 years? How they develop him and when his time comes is the unknown. But sure, another guy that I bet on being very successful when he gets on the field.
Man, he showed off that cannon real early in that game, though. He showed what he's
That's it.
got. So
That's it. That's what you love in the preseason, right? You see him make the great run and flip the field and spin, make Kyle Hamilton look a little silly and get in the end zone. So you see the athleticism, you see the run game, and then yeah, ripping a 50-yard pass down the sideline. And I think you saw the things that he's not ready to do yet, right? Probably didn't work through the progressions as quickly as he needs to and held on to the ball too long and maybe missed some things downfield and decided to just run with it instead. And that's part of the learning process, part of the growth of a young quarterback. I think what you always want to see is continued development. So hopefully this Saturday he looks a little bit sharper than he looked last Thursday, and you know the third preseason game even more so. So as long as we're kind of moving in the right direction, I think that's the expectation.
absolutely. I'll get to a couple of these comments here real quick. And if you
Yeah.
guys have any questions, you can throw them up in the chat. We'll do our best to get to those. Gammon says, Sean, is it too early to give Lance his Hall of Fame jacket?
I mean, you might as well buy it now, right? The price has got to be low. You wait 10
Yeah.
years and, all of a sudden you got to pay a lot more for it. So, I'm a gambling guy. So, he's certainly one to take the long shot on. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. 49ers Throwback says, hey, Jesse, how you doing? Appreciate the show. As always, what was your favorite part about the Packers game? Do you think Jimmy still gets cut? Yeah, favorite part was obviously Trey Lance. I would say Womack coming up big, solidifying his spot is the nickel corner would be the other one. And then, yeah, ultimately, I don't see a team trading for Jimmy. I think that he does get cut. So we'll see how that whole thing plays out. Appreciate
Who's the
y'all for
team?
tapping in.
It feels like Cleveland, right? Is that kind of what you're
Cleveland.
right?
Yeah.
If the
Yeah.
Deshaun thing goes much longer than expected, that seems like the team that is going and needing an answer if it's a long term, a full year. And now, is that worth trading for him, or they think they can get him in the waiver process? That'll be interesting. But
Yeah, that'll be interesting. And you're right. I mean, Cleveland runs a very similar system to what Shanahan does. And so I think that that's one, you're getting a quarterback very, very late in the offseason, right? And so probably or possibly by final cuts. And if that's the case, you want somebody that's going to know the system and not
Yeah,
have a big learning curve. And that's going to be Jimmy, veteran, definitely a starting level quarterback in this league. And I just think that that's probably the perfect fit to help kind of catapult them possibly to the playoffs while also keeping the coaches' jobs. I mean, let's be
yeah,
frank. This is not a long-term league. You got to stay winning. So
for
Cleveland
sure.
needs that.
It'd be interesting.
All right, let's talk about Trey Lance. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously that's why we are here. So what do you think Trey Lance has improved on the most? So last year we talked and all the things that you guys had worked on to get him prepped for the draft, and obviously the draft came and went, and now all of a sudden he's on a football team and learning how to be a professional. Year later, the team is his. What would you say, just looking at his game today
Yep.
versus a year ago, what would you say he's improved on the most?
I think physically there's definitely his footwork has improved and getting comfortable with kind of the style of offense that he's being asked to do now in San Francisco. We talked about this going in the draft. Hey, the hardest part of the draft prep process is what's he going to be asked to do that he's never been asked to do before, right? And so that's the biggest hurdle for really any of these guys, and certainly for Trey. I think you see Trey throughout practices from clips I've seen, and certainly in the small sample size the other night. You can see a total control of the offense. You can see him really sound with his footwork, being in good position at the top of the drop, which then would set him up for success to be accurate as a passer, right? What I love about the preseason with a guy with Trey's ability is you're obviously not going to run him all over the field in preseason. You're trying to limit him taking hits and things of that nature. So it forces the quarterback then to play as if he didn't have that extreme athletic ability, which in a cool way, like allows him and forces him to just play from the pocket, be sound with his footwork, get the ball out quickly. Maybe those were the things developmentally that you thought Trey had the furthest way to go with. And so to see him look really efficient and like I said, in the small sample size is great because now you're just going to add him in the run game. You're going to add him on more bootleg and design stuff out and play kind of out of structure. And he's just going to be able to take his game to the higher level. So that's first and foremost is just from a footwork standpoint. And then I think he's continued to build consistency in his throwing motion. He had a tendency to have the ball sail high on him. He had a tendency to be a little bit long in his arm path as he was making a decision to throw, and I've seen him now, looks like being more committed to his decisions and therefore getting his foot in the ground quicker, accelerating his arm through, and really being aggressive with trajectory on his throws. And those are the things that you saw a little bit in his games last year, some misses and then some great plays. And the goal for Trey now is to, hey, let's see more of that great stuff, right? Be more consistent. So we're seeing more of your best stuff more frequently. And then the last piece is just the growth in being in the system for a year. We talked about how great Trey was from a work ethic standpoint, from a study habits. He was a guy that blew us away in draft prep with how quickly he was able to soak in information and put it on the board and break down film and explain things back to us that he had just learned, maybe 2 days earlier. You're going to see that piece, I think, is really what's going to wow people going into the fall here is how he's making the decisions he's making, how he's making the reads he's making as quickly as he is, how he's making checks to line and controlling protections and, not getting flustered in the way that you're going to see many rookie and second year QBs early on in their careers. I think you're going to see Trey be better positioned to not have those struggles. And it goes to just how hard he works to be familiar with the offense and be comfortable in running it.
I know that that's one of the things that just jumped off when we talked to you the very first time before the draft, and you just talked about how smart he was. And it's funny because you talk about a kid that's 6'4" and as mobile as he is, athletic as he is, and you just couldn't stop talking about the mind, how
Yeah.
smart he is, how good of a
Yeah.
guy he is, how much of a leader he is. I just started to think like, wow, if he's all those things plus we see the physical attributes, this kid could be special, right? And that's what really started to sell me on Trey Lance. And you're right. I mean, you came on here, just after rookie OTAs or mini camps and said, Trey's already got the playbook down.
Yeah.
Like, we were talking 2-3 weeks. And then Shanahan confirmed that in November. It only took him 2-3 weeks to get the playbook down. And he's just extremely smart. And you're right. I mean, just having the extra year in that system, I think is going to benefit him greatly. And I think that we're already starting to see that a little bit in the preseason game. And we'll talk about that a little bit further. But the coach comes through and says, thanks for the content, Jesse. Huge insight that you're giving us. Well, Coach McEvoy's giving it to us from Trey's mechanics that needed work. From his footwork perspective, what improvements have you seen specifically in the Green Bay preseason game? Thanks for answering.
Yeah, I mean, like
yeah,
you said,
so footwork wise, yeah.
I mean, like you said, we touched on a little bit, but the biggest thing you're looking at is footwork. Is he ready to throw on time as routes break or as routes are open, right? And so, listen, if it's the first progression, if it's like your what we call our rhythm route, like top of the drop, on time, ball out, that's in theory the easiest throw to be ready to throw, right? Because you've worked routes on air, since you were in high school and hitting the top of the drop and being in good position to deliver. Though that's usually not where guys struggle. So you'll see guys, throwing quick out, 6-step outs, like 10-yard outs to the outside. I know you see a ton of that in San Francisco's offense, most of the NFL. That's something Trey's always throwing really well. Some quick seams, maybe a bang 8, like quick skinny post. Those are those rhythm throws. Most QBs don't struggle with that. It's when you're working deeper through the progression and you have to come off of one and have your eyes kind of reset your hips and feet to the second route in the progression or to third route in the progression. So now here's some of the double move, deep plays downfield, some of the digs and comebacks that take longer to develop. Those are the routes where I think coming out of the draft last year in the small sample size in the games he played last year as well, that's where I think he was struggling the most. It was getting himself in great position on the second and third routes in a concept and be able to deliver the ball accurately. Once again, we saw 6 throws against Green Bay the other night. So I'm not going to pretend like, oh, see, that's fixed, right? But
yeah,
I think, and once again, it goes hand in hand with understanding the offense and seeing more NFL style defenses and feeling more comfortable within that offense. But the footwork piece of understanding that everything you do has to stay on the same timeline. And so if one's not there, to quickly move to the next and get your feet and have a nice solid base, full cleat in the ground so you can deliver the second progression. That's not there. One more quick reset and be able to deliver the third. So the idea of staying loaded, so not being up on your toes, but being loaded, full cleat in the ground, loaded down your hips to be able to generate power. Combined with having a really good base, not too narrow, not too wide, and building that consistency. So that's what's jumped out to me in the clips I've seen from practice and the other night in Green Bay.
Yeah, and again, everybody thinks they're an expert, but I'm going to label myself an expert now. After talking to you 4 times, I know everything. No, one of the things that I noticed, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe you haven't seen this or whatever, but I feel like you talked a lot about his base last year. You just did it again. I feel like he's gotten to a point where that front foot, he's not overstriding. I felt like last year there was a lot where he'd almost overstride, which I felt took his upper body almost with it. And this year, right away, just as soon as I saw training camp clips, immediately said, oh, he's not striding as long. This is a much shorter stride, which I felt was keeping everything else in line. Are you noticing that as well?
100%. And the importance of that is it starts the whole sequence of your throwing motion.
Right.
So the quicker the foot's in the ground, the faster the arm accelerates and gets rid of the ball. So some of that, dip kind of, separation where Trey would drop the ball below his elbow, it would take a lot longer to get up and around, kind of a looping throwing motion. because his foot's in the ground quicker, you're seeing less of that from the arm path. So guys that are noticing, hey, that ball's really getting out of his hand quicker than it was last year. Sometimes it's just because his foot's getting in the ground faster, which is cool. The other piece, like you said, is because he's not overstriding, he's able to keep his weight back. So we're talking about not lunging towards the throw, but keeping his chest and his head still. So now instead of leaning into the throw, he's staying vertical, kind of the hips and the arm are doing all the work, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But imagine like I'm shooting a rifle. If everything's moving when I'm trying to shoot, that's going to affect not just the power from a quarterback, but obviously the
Yeah.
accuracy. And so now he's able to keep everything back, and it's allowing him to be what's more consistent as a thrower.
Absolutely. Yeah. I saw it immediately. So that's pretty cool. Because that confirmation on that one. Okay, let's I feel like we've done this every time, but I
Yeah.
gotta do it again because these are questions that come up with Trey a lot. Wobbly passes. And to me, when I look at Trey, I feel like the wobble is vastly improved. And I'm starting to think that a lot of it had to do with that finger injury potentially.
Yeah.
He talked about how he changed the grip of the football and had to work around that and actually retrain himself this offseason. He just said that in an interview yesterday. And so I got to imagine that plays into it a little bit. But, I went back and 49er fans will love this. Joe Montana had a wobble in his
Yeah.
pass, believe it or not, guys. Go watch it, And so wobble of the pass, A, how normal is that? And B, is it a concern at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think we're always striving for perfection, right? So anything we're doing from a training standpoint, the reality is, yeah, we can throw where it's a tight spiral every time, right? Or at least we should be striving for that. So it's you never dismiss it. You never just say, "Oh, that's good enough," and not try to get better at it. So I don't want to throw it out like it's not a big deal at all. But like you said, in the list of things that are important in a throw, right? So I need the throw to be on time. I need it to be accurate. Obviously I need to make a good decision, like throw it when he's open, don't throw it when it's not. So, if we're naming things that happen in a pass play, the velocity on the ball is certainly more important. The accuracy is certainly more important. Now, can the wobbly ball flight affect velocity and accuracy? It can, right? Just, we're not in a vacuum. So, now it becomes like a whole physics, equation at this point. But so I'm not trying to throw it out completely. But if the ball's on time, if the ball's accurate, if the ball's there with good velocity, the wobble then certainly falls well below those in level of importance. We used to always laugh, like, I'm not sure Peyton Manning threw a spiral his last 4 years in the league, right? But he was putting the ball in the money every single time. That stems from two things. Sometimes it can stem from like a really over the top delivery, which we know is not what Trey has,
Right,
right?
right.
But that's what would sometimes guys like Joe Montana, guys like Peyton Manning, who had a really high. Basically, the idea here is that you weren't able to extend through to the target as much because you were so high. You had like a quicker wrist flick, if that makes sense,
Hmm.
and so
Yep.
the ball could wobble out of your hand there. For Trey, it's really just committing all the way through the finish of the throw is the simplest way to put that. If I have a high school quarterback who throws a perfect ball right in the chest from 25 yards away, but it wobbles, I'll often tell them, I'm like, you did 98% of that perfect. And that's because you couldn't be that accurate with that kind of power if you didn't do the more important things. But if we just kind of let our wrists fire a little early and not fully extend through to the target, that's what can sometimes cause that wobble. You'll see it a lot on deeper balls where you're trying to add some touch or some layer. And sometimes quarterbacks have a tendency to get a little cute with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
trying to place it instead of throw it. And I think that's what you see with Trey, right? Like sometimes his kind of level two balls to the corner, to the outside. Sometimes his deep balls down the field. You're very rarely going to see it on a curl or a comeback or a dig where he's letting that thing rip.
yeah.
So it's just a mental thing of committing to that full extension, even on the touch throws. But man, like you said it, a lot of quarterbacks have really big careers and super consistently accurate without the perfect spiral every time. So, yeah, like I said, I hate to throw it out and pretend like it's nothing, but and something that Trey, because he's a stickler, like he's a perfectionist, it will bother him, and he'll certainly continue to work on it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny because every time it's almost like every time I see a training camp video of a wobbly pass, I'm like, oh, doesn't count if it wobbles, like here we go.
The
Here's
other thing
another
that's
quarterback.
funny the other thing's funny is, like, it's so easy for a fan base to live just in your own world,
For
and
sure.
so, your fan base, 49ers fans are breaking down every throw they see on film if it wobbled or didn't wobble, and the reality is if you just looked around the league, like, look at the video that's coming out of every other quarterback, you're like, "Oh, no, wait, that's every quarterback in the league." It's not like we have the one guy who throws a wobbly pass once in a while. But I get it, like, especially this time of year, the microscope and the spotlight's so bright, especially a guy like Trey who's taking over for the first time, that, sometimes I think we nitpick a little bit more than is necessary, but every guy in that position knows that's what's gonna happen. They're prepared for it, so.
Yeah, and I think too, the wobbly passes it might be a bigger deal when you're throwing rockets all over the field. And last year, he was a rookie, right? And he's literally every time he's just given everything he's got. And this year already, we're seeing he's starting to feather in some passes, get him up over linebackers, and just starting to work on his touch. And so the ball is a lot more catchable when it's wobbly and coming in a little bit easier,
Yeah,
right?
that's a
Last
good
year it
point.
was wobbly and coming in hard. That's
Yeah.
a tough pass to catch
Yeah,
for
that's
anybody.
actually a good point. And I think that's the best answer to your question. Like, don't ask me if wobbly passes matter. Ask the receivers, right? Like,
Right.
ask the receivers as Trey's throwing to daily, and they're really the ones whose feedback matters. They'll tell you, no, it is. It's tough to catch. It's bothering me. Where they're saying it doesn't matter as long as it's there. Um, but yeah, definitely, like I said, it's worth taking note of, and certainly any quarterback that we work with, it would be something we continue to try to improve for sure.
Absolutely. Well, I will bring up the other big thing that's going
Yeah.
on in the 49er community, and that is arm slots. So, there are the videos out there that I've seen, Brady, you talk about over the top throws. Brady is
Yep.
really, really over the top.
Yep.
I notice a lot of the really good quarterbacks sit in that 3/4 spot
Yeah.
very regularly. And Trey Lance, to me, people are saying it's sidearm. I don't see that. I see more of a 3/4 arm slot.
Yeah.
Just arm slots in general. Is there one that's better than the other that you would try to work through, or how does that whole thing work?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to efficiency, right? And so, like, how quickly from the time I separate my hands to throw can I have my elbow attack to the target and then have the ball release from my hand, right? If that makes sense. So the reality is, the lower the elbow has to elevate above the shoulder, the
Mhm.
quicker you can accelerate the elbow to the target. So in my world, we love the aggressive 3/4, as close to as close to sidearm as we can get, because it's the more efficient throwing motion. Now there's height things you have to worry about if you're trying to throw over defenders and stuff like that, dropping the ball 3 inches lower. It can come into play. In the same way, you'll see quarterbacks go completely sidearm to throw underneath maybe an eggs defender. Sometimes we'll need to elevate the elbow a little bit more to ensure that we get over defenders that might be underneath us or have their hands up. But for a guy who's got the height that Trey has, and the reality of what we do, we don't really throw over defenders that often. We're really throwing through lanes and through windows. I, this would be one I would throw out as a complete non-issue. And like I said, I wasn't going to do that with wobbly throws because I get it. There's probably 10 guys that do what I do that would argue that Tom Brady's mechanics are inefficient. Does that make sense? It's a funny thing to say.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not
Right,
critiquing
right.
a guy with his talent. And to answer your question, it's more important that you find something that works for you that you're really consistent with. Consistency is so key, right? Even if I did things that weren't the best way to do them, if I did it the same way every time, I'd be really, really successful at the quarterback position. So find the thing that works for you. which I think guys like Trey have and Pat Mahomes does. Malik's a very much three-quarter arm slot guy as well, who we talked about earlier. Um, you look around the league, I think the most important thing to see is that there's no two guys doing it the same way, right? Like Pat Mahomes does not look anything like Tom Brady. Neither of those two guys look anything like Aaron Rodgers when they throw the
Right.
football, right? And neither of them look like Trey, and Trey doesn't look like Jimmy, and all that's fine, right? Because they're obviously having a ton of success doing it their way.
One thing I actually do have a question for you, and I feel like one of the things I thought about Trey coming out that I felt like he could work on was kind of changing the arm slots
Yeah.
depending on the passes. I felt like Aaron Rodgers was really good about this. Zach Wilson, that was one of the things that was highly touted
Sure.
about him. And I felt like that was an area of opportunity for Trey. And I'm starting to see some of those changes in the arm angles depending on the throw. But one throw that I do still feel like he really needs to work on is that quick get it and fire it directly along the line of scrimmage for like a screen or something. I feel like
Mhm.
he's still, it's almost like he has to go through the whole motion. So, and I see the 49ers constantly working on this pass before he gets into things. So
Sure.
how would you like how do you work on things like that with quarterbacks? Like how do you get them to be quicker and not worrying about just getting their hands on the laces and shortening things up and changing it in those rare instances without messing up their mechanics completely?
Yeah, that's the toughest part because, like you said, we just spent all this time talking about consistency, doing things the same way every
Right.
time. And now we're saying, hey, is there a way we can kind of do it differently because this throw requires it? I think that's the hardest thing to for a quarterback to kind of get through his head, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because it's so against what their normal thought process would be. I wish there's a better answer. It's repetition. It's what you're seeing. It's why they're spending so much time, pre-practice and early on, especially because it's part of their offense. When you got the weapons they have, and you got to get, Brandon and Debo and those guys the ball quickly. That screen game and getting that ball to those receivers outside is such a big piece of what they do. That yeah, I mean, it's something that the idea is in a play scheme like that or a concept like that, those guys are the playmakers. The quicker you get them the ball, the bigger chance we have for a play. So I think the coaching point there is, what can we sacrifice from your normal throwing mechanics to speed up the time that the ball gets out? Does that make sense? And what we
Yeah.
can sacrifice is, hey, I don't need to have as much power. I don't need to get my hips all the way fired through. I don't maybe need to get myself completely straight line throw to the target because that's only 10, 12 yards away, and I can get away with some sidearm stuff or some weird arm angles, or make throws where I don't get my feet completely set and create a straight line throw. That's where you kind of try to steal some time. Um, so, I think Trey, and I haven't seen as much of you of him struggling with that throw, but as I'm hearing you describe it, it's him just being comfortable, realizing like, hey, this is a throw that you don't have to worry about being perfect on, if that makes sense. And I think, up to this point, I think, Kyle and the whole 49ers offensive coaching staff has done such a good job of kind of molding Trey into the quarterback that they need him to be for this system. So I think that's something comes pretty naturally. It's so funny because really the athletic ability he has, his ability to throw from these aggressive arm slots should be what allows him to do this really well. So I don't think it's going to be a lack of ability that gets him there. It's just going to be
Right.
a repetition until he gets very comfortable.
Yeah, and to me, it's funny because we talk about Trey and we talk about all the athletic ability and physical abilities, and I just think he's kind of the ultimate like conservative player, right? He protects the ball first,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
fantastic. That's like number one thing as a quarterback.
Yeah.
And so I almost feel like, in hearing Fred Warner and some of the players talk about him last year, and really my thoughts about him was like he's almost too conservative. It's okay
Yeah.
to like just go out there and
Yeah.
fire it around, man. Be you a little
Yeah.
bit. And so I think just growing into himself may actually help with that as well.
I think that's a great observation. It's one of the things, and Quincy Avery talked about this in his draft process, his pre-draft process. It's one of the criticisms. You know, he had that phenomenal junior year where he didn't throw an interception for the entire year. That's a guy who manages the game, who protects the football. That's why they go undefeated and win a national championship. But also, to your point, is he reluctant to throw the ball as much as he should? Is he, similar to what we are talking about with Malik, did he rely on, hey, I'd rather pull it down and run than try to fit a tight throw in? No, that was something that I think was one of the criticisms we got in the pre-draft process, something I told you Quincy Avery talked about a lot in some of the interviews he did leading up to the draft. Yeah, it's kind of a blessing and a curse. And yeah, I've heard it. I remember, Kittle last year and this offseason saying like, hey, when it really clicked and we knew he was going to be special was when he started just letting some of those throws rip in practice, right?
Yeah.
That's the other thing too. It's like, this is the time to figure out what you're capable of, what throws you can make and what throws you can't make, which is always funny when I watch a practice report come out. Oh, this quarterback was, 14 of 20 and he threw 2 picks and, the whole world melts down, right? Like we need another quarterback. It's like, no, this is what we want. Like, let him go out there and be a gunslinger. And, the reality is he learns the lessons now, and those are throws and mistakes he doesn't make come week 1. Which is what you want. I mean, that's good coaching. And a quarterback who realizes this is the time to do that's a good thing.
It's I'm so glad you said that. That was going to be my follow-up because that's exactly what's happening, right? We've got every beat writer going there and reporting his only 50% so far through training camp, and he's at a 1-to-1 ratio with his interceptions to touchdowns, and somehow that overrides what we actually saw when he played, which looked really good. It's wild.
But once again, I made this point earlier. It's not exclusive to your fan base. That's the thing. Like I know you do too. You're observing the whole league, and it's no different coming out of Jets camp. It's no different coming out of Jacksonville. It's no different coming out of New York with the Giants. Like, it's just, I mean, everybody. I'm watching the Titans do the same thing with all their quarterbacks. Yeah, it's just, that's what training camp is, and it's cool that people get the opportunity to see things and come to live practices, and the media gets out there and they can chart every pass thrown. And it's cool because people love football and they want to consume, and that's what they have to follow right now. So, like I said, it's not a bad thing. It's just we got to be realistic about what we're talking about.
Yeah, last offseason, Jamar Chase forgot how to catch a football.
That's right.
If you remember correctly. Yeah. So we saw how that turned out. It turned out just fine.
Right? You couldn't see it, right? So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyways, 49ers Daddy says Trey Lance is going to be a legend in this league. Thanks, coach, for all of your work to help him on his journey to this point. That's cool.
That's awesome, man. Like I said, a very small part that, we've been fortunate to be able to help with. But no, he's going to be special. I mean, there was no doubt about it as he was coming out of the draft and the time we worked with him in college, and certainly nothing's changed. The cool thing is you're hearing more and more people echo that. And it's to what you spoke to earlier was about the personality and like work ethic and getting to talk with them. I saw Lou Riggett came out the other day, and I remember Lou was there at Trey's pro day and was very complimentary there. And, I saw he just, was really complimentary the other day on ESPN. And, the guys who have sat down with him and kind of know what we know and what the 49ers coaching staff knows, they're the guys who are really optimistic about the future here. And not everybody's had that ability yet. And so you've only seen very small things on the field, or, a small sample size last year. But yeah, it makes it's hard not to imagine him really being successful through his career.
Yeah, and I love that because for me, and this is kind of what I've been trying to tell people, like, don't panic. What you saw last year, the growth from the Arizona game to the Texans game and how good he looked in the Texans game, Trey is not going to be worse week 1 than he was then. You've given him 7 more months to grow. And whatever Trey ends up being, whether that's, Hall of Fame player or out of the league in 3 years, right? Like let's say nobody knows the answer to that, which, we don't. I guarantee you that Trey is going to get the best out of his abilities because he cares that much and he wants to be great. And that's all you can ask for.
Yeah.
Wherever the chips fall, that's where they fall.
That's it. I mean, there's really two reasons guys fail. And one is they just not talented enough, and the other is they don't work hard enough. With Trey, he certainly has the enormous talent, and he's not a guy who's ever gonna take anything for granted from a work ethic standpoint. So, like I said, I'm not going out on a limb here thinking Trey Lance is gonna be a really good NFL quarterback. He's got all this talent and he's got that work ethic. At that point, it almost takes care of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw that show up in the preseason game in interesting ways. After he threw the touchdown pass, he ran downfield and got the ball to make sure that Gray got to keep his first touchdown pass. Then we later learned that when Purdy threw his first touchdown pass, it was Trey that ran around to get that ball as well. And it's just those little things, man. The kid he's such a leader. It's
So,
incredible.
so the quarterback coach who works with Brock Purdy is a really good friend of mine, Will Hewlett. Worked with Ian Book a couple years ago for his draft prep. Worked with Brock Purdy this year, and so I'm watching the game, and I text Will as soon as Brock throws his touchdown. I'm like, Brock Purdy touchdown, let's go! Like we're always celebrating each other's guys, and he texted me back like a few hours later and told me that story. He's like, wait till you hear the story. Like Brock told me like it was Trey who went and got his ball for him and brought it, and that once again, just another little snippet of like who Trey is that people are starting to see more and more of, which is neat.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, he did put some little film out
Yeah,
there, and I know that you've seen the game and broken
yeah.
it down. What just overall high level first, what were your thoughts on Trey, and then we can dive a little bit deeper into
Yeah, I
the
mean, I think the things that
some of
you
those
you love seeing is just, control the offense, getting out there. You're not having pre-snap penalties. Guys are lined up. I can't remember if they were making a ton of checks or things like that. But San Francisco does so many shifts and motions, and that's a big part of their offense. So that's a little bit more than maybe some quarterbacks have to handle every snap, even early in preseason. So just to see the offense run efficiently, you love that. You see a little taste of his athletic ability and getting to move and on the one run. But to me, it's the big deep ball. Not only the 76-yard touchdown and the throw, but to do it on 3rd and 9, and in moments where you know that's a type of throw that guys aren't even going to look at in the progression because they're trying to just move the chains and pick up 9 yards and get the first down. And so I think you're seeing what we talked about earlier, like a confidence of just letting it rip, maybe being more aggressive than he would have been this time last year. And those are the bright signs, especially for a fan base and an offense that if there was a criticism about their quarterback play, it was not taking these aggressive plays downfield, not having explosive over the top plays. And here we go. You got 6 snaps in your first preseason game, and one of them is this big play that, I think a lot of 49ers fans have been thirsty for, right? So that's it. I mean, it's 6 plays. Who knows what the next 6 will look like? But it's always fun when you get 6 great ones and then you get out. We saw that a little bit with some of the veterans this past weekend. But yeah, it was like I said, I think the things that you were hoping to see from Trey this year, you certainly saw, and I think that's worth getting excited about.
absolutely. Now, one of the throws that a lot of people are talking about is that
Yeah,
out pattern to
yeah,
Gray, right? That was
yeah,
also a third down pass. It was for me, first of all, it was nice to see a quarterback just rip it from far hash to outside the
yeah,
numbers 10 plus yards. I mean, that's a power throw right there. And
yeah,
you see it immediately. But it was a little high and outside potentially, depending on if the receiver ran the wrong route. What
yeah.
what can cause that? Because I have heard some reports saying that he has been a little high into the outside on some of those throws. So what would cause that in your opinion?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's like we talked about earlier, it's when you're not set correctly to that throw, right? So if we go back to, hey, let's make things as easy as we can every time, being consistent. So we're talking about creating true straight line throws, right? And so sometimes if I'm late working to the progression, my feet aren't quite set, and I haven't truly created the straight line throw, well, now I've added a variable to my throw, if that makes sense. So maybe mom's still too far inside, which means I have to kind of throw the shoulder open as I throw, kind of creates a little bit more of a slashing motion with my arm, which has a tendency to then have that ball miss wide right? And because we're slashing, we talk about that 3/4 arm slot where I think is a good place to live. The slashing brings that down even more potentially.
Mhm.
And that's where that ball can take off high as well, right? So a lot of quarterbacks, especially when they're throwing to their non-throwing hand side, you'll see the high and outside miss because they weren't set as wide as they needed to be on that throw, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I watched it a few times. Like once again, it's so hard. I don't know what their progression is. I don't know what they're taught to do if they get this coverage. Um, was there a miscommunication quarterback receiver wise? Not sure. Um, but it looked to me like he was either slightly off the timeline with his progression, like not quite a little late to the throw. But to me, because of the miss, it made me feel like he wasn't directly like creating a straight line throw, if that makes sense.
yeah,
But
and
I guess, no, but then there's other times you just kind of miss, right? The reality is like,
for sure,
like there's no quarterback who's gonna roll out there and go 40 for 40 and come home, right?
right.
Um, it's hey, how badly are we missing? Are we missing in an acceptable spot if you call something like that? But yeah, to me it looked like he was maybe slightly late on the throw. And then I had the thought that he was set too far inside to get the ball to the outside where it needed to be.
Yeah, that's interesting. So for the members of the channel, I did a breakdown on just my thoughts overall, and somehow I don't know how I did this, but 30 minutes on 6 plays. I saw a lot apparently, but
Just
one
wait
of the
till
things
week
that
one, huh? Week one's gonna be a
right,
7 hour
right.
video.
Seriously. So one of the things that I took note on that throw is I just felt like he was a little nonchalant in his drop back, right?
Yeah.
And it's so he got back and Danny Gray is extremely fast. And so maybe he's used to throwing that to Ayuk or Debo, who are fast as well, but Gray's,
Yeah.
he's just a touch faster. So maybe he didn't quite get there with the good timing you wanted. It's like, oh crap, he's there. I gotta
Yeah.
fire this thing. And so there you go. So that's kind of what I noticed is his
Yeah.
drop back was a little too nonchalant for me, maybe.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point that you made with, that you're still kind of building the relationship with different receivers and you're still getting really comfortable. And then, not for nothing, game speed's different than practice speed. And so like maybe Danny Gray had a little gear that he didn't have last Wednesday, when they did that same route. Um, but ultimately things like that always fall on the quarterback. And to your point, Trey is the one that needs to make sure he's in a good position so that that doesn't happen.
For sure, absolutely. What I took note of all the things that you said too, and I'll just reiterate them. But you know, command of the offense certainly was there. They got in and out of the huddle quickly, which again shows that he knows the plays. I did notice a couple checks where he hit his helmet and checked
Yep.
to whatever. There was no penalties like false start penalties or anything that had to do with him, which was great to see. And I just, watching him last year, I called it organized chaos because I felt like he was actually probably more comfortable than what maybe his feet were showing in the pocket, but it felt like he was constantly moving, right? Constantly surveying, moving, just not maybe used to the speed. And this year it was like, geez, are you? Can I wake you up? You just
Yeah.
seem almost too calm back there. What is
Yeah.
going? Like completely different player, and I love to see it. And so for me, that was really reassuring for me to see. Is like, wow, he's comfortable back there now.
Yeah.
Like this is a whole new level.
Well, when people talk about like the game slowing down, that's what they're talking
Mhm.
about, right? Is like this sense of calm, this sense of, hey, I'm kind of prepared. I understand my offense so well that I don't have to think about what I need to do or my thoughts, my reads, so I can focus more on what the defense is doing. And now, hey, I'm really comfortable with, hey, this guy's coming down. I know what rotation I'm going to get, whatever the case may be. And yeah, so it's pretty fun to play with that level of a sense of calm. And you feel like you're literally just going out there and executing what you've been working on all week. So, no, you're right. Well, it's certainly cool to see that right out of the gate in the first preseason action.
Absolutely. Tommy Huxley says Jimmy Ward's a leader, the defense, not Warner. I don't know about all that, but they did put Jimmy Ward's locker directly next to Trey's for a reason. So take that for what it is. And Swan Song says, thanks for booking Coach McEvoy. Always stoked to hear him talk about Trey and his mechanics. Yeah, me too, man. Me too.
That's
I love
awesome,
it.
man. I see him commenting a ton on Twitter and stuff like that. So he's a good one. He's a good one. I appreciate everybody like, wanting to just hear the content and and following along and saying, like you said right here, nice things. So I appreciate it, brother.
Absolutely. And before we end, two last things. One, I've got everything in the description, how to follow you on Twitter, your personal website. Why don't you plug those things real quick? And then there's something that I gotta ask you that
Yeah.
we didn't go over in pre-production. So hopefully I don't throw you too far off, but I think you'll nail this one. So why don't you go ahead and plug what you got going on?
Yeah, so it's QB Coach McEvoy. Like I said, it's most of our stuff's based here in Atlanta. And then once we get to the off season, we're bouncing around. We got all over the country. So we did some camps in San Fran, LA. Trey was out there with us, and came out and helped support the couple little camps we did for some high school guys out in San Francisco this year. And he came out. We did one in Atlanta, and he stopped by there. And Trey's so good about always, it means such a big deal for these youth and high school quarterbacks to see kind of the guy they look up to. And Trey's always good with that piece. But yeah, so this time of year, QB Coach McEvoy on Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. Try to just put out some helpful stuff. So if you're a quarterback or just interested in, the way the game's played now at all levels, we'll try and put out a little advice, thoughts, whatever. So follow along, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, your social media has blown up since we first got a hold of you. I
Well,
felt like
it's
you didn't
really
really care so
easy.
much.
We just have so many talented guys, right? So it's pretty
Yeah,
simple. I'm not doing anything except like, hey, look at these 12 great NFL quarterbacks and the throws they made at today's session.
right,
Right. That's it. I
right.
just post a video of, here's Deshaun and there's Trey, there's Justin Fields, here's Malik. Your followers grow pretty quickly just by doing that. So I don't know if I can take much credit.
Yeah, well, you've done a good job growing it either way. At
I
least just
appreciate it.
throwing those out there. People do love to see that stuff, man. But
Plus the behind
so
the stuff that you don't normally get to see. Right.
right,
So it is
right.
pretty.
Absolutely. And, I know you got to be careful, especially when they're in the NFL. There's, only so much you can show, but it is cool to see it whenever you can throw it out. People just eat that up for sure. Before we let you go, though, there are still some people that they're reserved on Trey. I'll put it
Yeah.
nice. They're reserved on Trey, right? Maybe he's the guy, maybe he's not the guy. If you could
Mhm.
give us 60, maybe 120-second elevator pitch on Trey Lance, why the 49er fan base should buy into Trey if they haven't already, things about Trey and what in your eyes will make him great in this league.
Yeah, I think there's a skill set that's pretty unique, and it's a skill set that checks so many of the boxes of what it takes to be successful at the quarterback position. So the big, strong arm, ability to stretch the field. And now with the way the game's played, and we've talked about this, and you're seeing some of the best players at that position are able to bring that athleticism to the position. And now they can add to the run game. They can create more time in the pocket if things break down. They can play out of structure. So the ability to be efficient, big strong arm from the pocket, plus the athleticism, and to add to the run game. Like those are all the things you would want if you were like building your perfect quarterback. Then you talk about the intangible stuff and the work ethic and the leadership and just being like the guy that people gravitate to and want to be around and want to play hard with and for. But that's my sell. The funny thing is the 49ers told you what they thought of Trey when they made the commitment they made in last year's draft. And to trade up and make those moves to get him and then to kind of create the development plan they put in place to have him take over going into this year and year two. I think it's anybody who's been around them the way I have, the way Quincy has, the way the 49ers coaching staff has, I've already been sold.
Absolutely. Coach, as always, man, thank you so much for coming on. We love it when you're here. The show always blows up when you're around, and I can't thank you enough. You gave us almost an hour of your time. Chat, hope you loved it. Sounds like you did. I will be back tomorrow. Coach, thank you again so much, man.
No, it's a pleasure, man. Enjoy it. Thanks, dude.
All right.